Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gats and kittens, comic book fans all around the world, welcome to another brand spanking new edition of Ask Chuck Dixon, where I answer your questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Eyes on the road, everybody. Let's not waste another precious second of your valuable time. Ivan Aguila. How many questions per week? I mean, how many questions you receive, including Mr. Ignatowski, per week? And how do you set the amount of questions you are going to answer? Is it a guess, a pattern, what? There's a lot of guessing. I probably get, I probably get a good dozen questions. I mean, a good dozen questions a day. And of course, they go into the show. I get a lot of questions. Well, I think you asked more about this later on, but yeah, it's pretty organic. I don't know how long the show is going to be until I'm done recording it. Um, I pick a number of questions I think will fill out at least 40 minutes of airtime, and you know I go from there. Now you have more questions on this very subject, which earns you a twin spin, my friend. So Ivan is back with, does the Wednesday, the day the video is released, you get more questions? It happens to me. Like I hear the show and I go, oh, I would like to know about this and that. Yeah, the show does prompt more questions, particularly on media, on the actual YouTube and on Facebook when I announce, um, and on X as well when I announce a new episode. I get a rash of questions that day, so it does happen that way. But my preferred way of getting them, as you know, is for you to directly email them to me. That way, I don't miss any. I don't want anybody to feel slighted. Okay, well, you have more curiosity about this very subject, Ivan, so you earn a triple spin. Woohoo! Take that to the bank. Okay, Ivan asked, do you make a questions buffer or just get as much questions as you think is enough to fill the week and discard the rest? I never discard the questions. I might put a question off for another time, um, but I never throw a question away unless I'm not going to answer it, which I think is what you asked me about in the very next question, which earned you a quadruple spin. You're just piling them up. You're just banking them spins, my friend. Okay, Ivan is back again with, I know there are some questions you simply do not want to answer. However, I have the impression that sometimes some questions are not answered just because they fell behind. So should we, us who ask questions, eventually repeat a question that was not answered? Yeah, feel free to repeat, because sometimes I will, like, someone might ask me 6 questions and I only want to use 3 of theirs that week, but the other 3 were good, and they'll sort of fall back behind in the list and I will miss them, because I'm basically just leaving them in the emails. So yeah, if you feel like you've asked a great question and I didn't get around to it, please feel free to repeat the question and let me know again. But yeah, there are some questions I won't answer. Generally, the kind of questions that bait me into critiquing another comic book creator. I get a lot of them. Like people that know, I don't like Joe Slobotnik's writing will say, so what do you think about Joe Slobotnik's run on Captain Potato? It's like, okay, I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to share that. Um, you know, my mom always said, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say it on the internet. Uh, no, she never said that. Anyway, so there you go. There's inside baseball sort of housekeeping questions about how I do this show. And how I do this show it's real loosey goosey. Like I said, it's real organic. It's just me. I don't have a staff. I don't have a producer or anything like that. I'm just doing this, winging it. I line the questions up, and often I don't even get that much of a chance to think about my answers before. I mean, these are not scripted answers, as you can probably tell. I'm These are all off the top of my head generally. The only time I think about the answers to these questions is when I'm putting the visuals together. And I put the visuals together as kind of a visual outline for myself to remind myself of where I might want to go with an answer to one of your questions. And speaking of questions, here comes another one. Alex Berry, can you talk about what it was like working at Now Comics? You've spoken of a lot of other companies, but not too much on Now. Well, Now was a company that sort of sprang up in the 90s, and it was owned by a guy called Tony Caputo, and I think it was fully owned. He might have had investors, I'm not sure. He got some money from somewhere and decided to go into the comic book business. I never asked any questions about where the money came from. Not to say that came from nefarious sources. I just assumed the guy got some kind of a windfall and decided to go into comics. And as the old adage goes, if you want to make $1 million in comics, start with 2 million. So um, he started out with getting a lot of license deals, Ghostbusters and Fright Night and Mr. T and things like that, and was going, pretty gangbusters, early '90s style. But I think what happened was he grew too quickly. He took on too many things, but he did some good stuff. I mean, hired me quite a bit. Me and Todd Fox and Enrique Villagrán got to work quite a bit with him on titles like Racer X and Alias and Super Cops and stuff like that. And it was pretty free and easy company to work for. The overworked editor was Kate Llewellyn. He had one editor for the entire line, and I think maybe at one point she was editing like 24 books. And she was she was easy to work with. I mean, I don't remember anything like rewrites or anything like that from her. And I play by the rules. I wasn't trying to sneak anything past them. You don't have to keep an eye on me. I don't need my hand held when I'm writing a story. And because I was coming in with basically my own crew, I mean, it was my buddy Todd and my Argentino amigo Enrique. We kind of came as a package deal. And so, I was kind of putting it all together, except for the coloring. I was putting the whole thing together. I also did a issue of Terminator with Ricardo Villagrán. So yeah, it was fun for a while, and then the old dreaded cash flow problems came up, where they couldn't pay you, and payments kept getting more and more delayed. And because I was packaging the work, I was getting the artwork first. It wasn't being sent to Now. So basically, I was getting the artwork from Argentina, the finished artwork from Argentina. And when we weren't getting paid on Alias, when the wheels really came off and there was obviously no more money, and we were never going to get paid, I held back the last couple of issues of Alias, the artwork, until we got payment. And so they were never published until recently by Antarctic Press. So you can read the complete Alias now. But it was typical of startup comic companies at that time. Some guy with more money than sense decides to get into the comic book business, which is a rough business to get into. I mean, even DC and Marvel have a hard time staying in the comic book business. So it's tough for a new guy. And, he got in on the boom and went out with the bust, and, just ran out of money. And the big thing was he expanded too quickly. And this is a mistake I see a lot of, new comic book companies make, or used to make. It's kind of landscape's kind of changed. It's not a lot of new companies now. It's all crowdfunding. So your negative costs are covered up front, which is a great business model for now. But we got to move into retail as RIPA is moving into retail. I know I'm going off on a tangent, but it's my show. So, and the problem is when you start a new company and you get some early success, you start expanding your line, and that's when the trouble starts. And eventually you have to keep expanding the line to get new number ones to keep the money coming in. It's kind of like a comic book Ponzi scheme. But eventually interest in your company wanes, the number ones don't sell as much, and the money dries up. And, mom won't write you another check, or, whatever, and the rent comes due. And as I've always said, if if a comic book company has to decide between paying its freelancers and paying the electric bill, guess who gets paid? The electric company. Freelancers can wait forever. They can go on welfare. Well, electric company can't. Electric company's going to come turn your lights out. So that's the way things go. That's why I always say, when you're going to go to work for a comic book company or anybody really, say, do you have money and where does it come from? So, a little bit of advice from me. You get a twin spin. It's Twin Spin Day. Lots of spins flying out the door here today. Alex Berry again. Follow up. When you created the character Johnny Dollar, was that an old-time radio homage? Since the Green Hornet was started on radio and a prominent radio show called Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar, ran for over a decade. Yeah, when I was writing Green Hornet, for now, I named the guy Johnny Dollar because it was a famous radio show, which for a long time starred Bob Bailey. And just for you old-time radio geeks, I'm a bit of an old-time radio geek. Listen to a lot of old-time radio. Bob Bailey was also in another superior series to Johnny Dollar called Let George Do It. It's a series I really like. Very light, comedic kind of detective series. But anyway, I thought, what the hell? Johnny Dollar had fallen into public domain. I thought I'm going to name a character in keeping with the radio theme. So yeah, you tumbled onto that one real good. Triple spin. All right. Alex Berry is back with, what were your plans for Crimson Wasp and Johnny Dollar? It seems what Fortier wrote, Ron Fortier, wrote wasn't what you have done. And then the writers who took over for him, bringing back Johnny Dollar after Ron had killed him off, seemed really dumb. It is kind of dumb. It seems like maybe those writers hadn't read the previous issues. Yeah, I had a bit of a run on Green Hornet. And it's kind of bittersweet for me because I enjoyed writing it. And it was kind of practice unwittingly. I never knew I was going to be writing Batman and Robin. It was kind of practice for writing Batman and Robin. A masked hero, wealthy masked hero riding around a big badass car with his, young sidekick. Kind of the same, exactly the same genre, masked hero and young sidekick kind of thing. And I enjoyed writing it, and it was fun. We were kind of lumbered when I wrote it with Niall's insistent that Kato be a girl, and they created this female Kato, which it turned out they did not get permission from the licensor, and the licensor was rather ticked about it. And so I was fired off the book, and I kind of suspect that maybe Tony Caputo told the licensors that the female Kato was my idea, which it was not. I was looking forward to writing classic, Kato, and I ended up writing this other character. And so I got, baby with the bathwater, I got thrown out. But then I found out that I was replaced by Ron Fortier, and Ron Fortier is this huge Green Hornet fan, and big devotee, and Ron was kind of wounded when he didn't get Green Hornet. Now I didn't really know Ron that well at the time. And I found all this out after the fact. I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I stole a book from this guy. He was much better suited to write it. He knew a lot more about Green Hornet's history than I did, and was equipped to do a better job than I would do on the book. But I wasn't aware of that. Apparently, they had promised him the book and then gave it to me instead. And I've explained this to Ron, and Ron's been very gracious about it. And we're friends. So he understood, it wasn't up to me, but apparently a lot of blame got heaped on me on this book, both for the female Kato and for stealing a book away from Ron Fortier, which I never would have done if I had known the facts, because I think that writing assignments should go to those best suited for them, not those who just get there first. So there you go. There's some Green Hornet knowledge for you. Quadruple spin. Too many spins today. The spin box is going to be empty by the end of this. Alex again. Do you think your text comics will get an English language release? For those of you new to this channel, Tex Willer is a long time, 80 years, 80 plus years, comic book franchise in Italy. It's a Western comic, obviously. And it's a comic that I think is the best Western comic ever published anywhere in the world. And it has a long history of fantastic artists working on it and everything else. And I was lucky enough, or fortunate enough, or dogged enough to get to write 3 Tex stories. One is an actual full comic album in color, and then I got to write 2 shorter stories. By shorter, I mean like 32 pages. Tex comics are thick. There's various monthly editions of Tex. They generally run around 150 pages each, and I got to write 2 more Tex stories that appeared in, I think, Tex Color and then Tex Magazine. I can't remember. They're like digest size magazines. And it was such a great experience. And I had been trying to get on assignments from Benelli for years and years and years. And Joe Kubert tried to get me in with them. But it was eventually a Danish comic book editor who was an editor for the company that republishes Tex in Danish. And he's the one that said, to Benelli, you should get Chuck Dixon to write some of these stories for you. And he convinced them to let me do it. And I would have continued doing it, but as the editor, Mauro Boselli, explained, he says, doing the translations added to the costs of doing the stories. And I understood, but at least I got to do 3 Tex stories. And which, it's just feather in my cap. I loved writing it. I love these characters. And now Epicenter Press, who republishes Tex here, if you haven't checked them out, please check them out. These comics are gorgeous. And you get these big, thick, like 300-page hardcovers for like, $25-30. Artwork is fantastic. Pasquale Frazenda, Claudia Villa. I mean, just fantastic freaking artwork and great stories by Mauro Boselli. And just terrific. And Epicenter has contacted me and said they would like eventually to do a collection of all of my Tex stories in one volume. And my Tex stories would be translated to English for the first time, which would be really cool and really flattering. And I would like to see that happen someday, as apparently would you, since you asked me about it. Quintuple spin. More spins than anyone can handle today. Alex is back with Your Storming Paradise is a rare alternative history comic. Alternative history is relatively popular in prose publishing, but much rarer in comics. Why do you think it's so rare in comics? I think because anything about history is rare in comics. Comics are so dominated by superheroes. There's not much room for anything else. And also, most alternative history stories are seen as science fiction, and science fiction is generally not popular in American comics. And really, I'm not that big a fan of alternative histories either, but this one attracted me. The concept of this one attracted me because this is an alternative history that very well could have happened. If you don't know about Storming Paradise, it's about the invasion of Japan that would have had to have happened if Japan had not surrendered after the 2 atomic bombs were dropped on them. You may or may not know this, but we dropped a bomb. Well, you probably know. We dropped a bomb on Hiroshima. We dropped a bomb on Nagasaki. And we threatened to drop more unless the Japanese surrendered. But it was a bluff. We didn't have any more. We had the fat man and little boy, and those are the only bombs we had. And it would have taken a long time to put together more atomic bombs to drop on Japan. But Japan fell for the bluff, thank God for everybody involved, us and the Japanese both, and they surrendered unconditionally. But had we had to have if we had to have invaded Japan, we would have seen 1 million American dead, and it would have been American dead because all of our allies said they would not participate in the invasion of Japan with us. So 1 million American dead, and untold numbers of Japanese dead, and the animosity the American public had toward the Japanese at this point, at the end of the war, understandably, was high. Um, the invasion of Japan and the massive casualties it would have caused, um, the American public would have demanded basically the end of the Japanese culture. Japan would have ended as a society, I really think. They would have ended as a society because we would have had to completely, the United States would completely have to destroy the Japanese islands, structures, um, culture. It would just be erased. There wouldn't be enough Japanese left to continue, uh, you know, the Japanese heritage. They wouldn't go on. It would have become a fiefdom of the United States because what choice would we have had? And the Japanese were not going to give us any choice. The battle plans of both sides were declassified in the early 2000s, and our plans to invade and their plans to defend the island, trust me, was a recipe for a bloodbath like the world had never seen before. And thank goodness, uh, the Japanese surrendered, and we avoided all of that. I mean, I know personally. I mean, I said this to my wife the other day. I said, very possibly neither one of us would be here today if the invasion of Japan had happened. My father-in-law, my wife's father, was to be mobilized. They told him he was going to be mobilized to go to Japan. He had fought in Italy um, in World War II with the 10th Mountain Division, and he was informed that he would be mobilized. And my dad was in the Army Air Corps, and it is very possible he would have been called up once again to participate in the invasion of Japan. And it would have been nasty. And we would have lost a whole lot of Americans. A whole lot of us, maybe many of you listening to me today, would not be here today had we invaded Japan. Because your dad, your grandfather, whoever, they wouldn't have come back. It would have been absolutely horrible, absolutely horrible. And but an event that dramatic that might very easily have happened was such grist for a story that I pitched it to Butch Geis, and I said, we should do this together. And then Butch came in with me, and we pitched it to Wildstorm, and they bit. So it's cool. It was a lot of fun to work on. I really enjoyed doing the research, and I always love working with my buddy Butch. Next question. Joshua Ignatowski, where have you been? What's your favorite scene from Lord of the Rings films, and why? Well, my favorite scene in the film is also my favorite scene in the books. It's when Eowyn faces down the Witch King and his flying dragon. I remember when I was reading Lord of the Rings, and I was in junior high and high school. Took that long. I started it in junior high and finished it in high school. Um, I love it. I love Lord of the Rings, but it can be a bit of a slog. I actually appreciate Lord of the Rings more now when I'm older because I really appreciate the language. Boy, Tolkien was a great writer and great use of language. And I really appreciate the books more now than I did when I first read them. But I'm reading them for ho-de-ho adventure stuff. I'm not reading them for language. I'm just a young punk kid. What do I know about syntax and word usage and phrasing? I don't know anything about any of those things. So I'm just looking for sword fights and magic and all that crap, monsters, and so parts of it were a bit of a slog. And about it halfway through Return of the King, I'm like, oh my God, why am I doing this? Where's the payoff? And then you get to the scene where Eowyn faces down the Witch King. I was like, okay, it was all worth it. This is such an awesome scene, and it's such a great scene in the movie Return of the King. And it's one of my favorite scenes in fiction of all time. It's just a hell of a thing. Now, my other favorite Lord of the Rings scene is not in the movie, sadly. There's a scene in Return of the King. Everything pays off in Return of the King, where Frodo and Sam are, they're at their nadir. They're not sure they're going to make it. They're tired. They're filthy. It's just looking bad. The dangers ahead of them are just incalculable. It just seems like this is an impossible quest, and they're just exhausted. And Sam, in a very, very poignant scene, starts talking about how he will never see an elephant. He will never live. In other words, he's saying, I will never live to see an elephant. I know I'm going to die. I know even if we make it, I'm not going to survive this trek. And my greatest regret, other than not being able to get back to the Shire, is that I will never see an elephant. And it's such a poignant scene. It's just a heartbreaking scene. And I imagine it wasn't included in the movie just for time or whatever. But it's one of my favorite. Once again, one of my favorite scenes in fiction, and just so beautifully and touchingly written. Twin spin, of course, Mr. Ignatowski gets himself a twin spin. Okay, Joshua is back with the Rippaverse's locations of Forest Park and Shadow Valley have some really great names. Will we ever get to learn the in-universe stories of how we got to them? That would be up to Eric. Eric named these places. He had a reason for naming them. I don't often say, hey, why'd you name this like this? Or why is this like that? I just take it as accepted. This is the name of the town. This is what we're doing. This is, it's his world. The only time I did ask him was he had a character, an established character, who had a very unusual name. And I asked him if the source of the name was an actual historical character from Texas history. And he said, yes, it was. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe someday in Eric's own writing, he will provide us with the answers to why Florist Park is called Florist Park, and what's the deal with Shadow Valley. Triple spin. All right. Joshua's back with, what would you say as a writer has been key to injecting unpredictability into stuff you've written? Yeah, you know, I've often spoken of the deconstructed plot line. You set your characters in motion and they have a goal. They're in reference to Lord of the Rings. They're going to eventually reach Mordor and throw the ring into the Lake of Fire. Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, they're eventually going to find that grave and dig up that gold. But if you wrote a story where they just set out and they just go there, that's boring as hell. Just absolutely boring. Like a heist story. Does anybody want to see a heist movie where everything goes right, or a military secret mission story where everything goes right? How about a Mission Impossible story where it just all works out for everybody? There's no complications or suspense or threats. When you throw complications and obstacles in the way of your hero, when you make it harder for him to accomplish what he needs to accomplish, that is called a deconstructed storyline. And deconstructed storylines have to be full of surprises. That's just the nature of them. And so you want to, it's a challenge. It really is a challenge to come up with surprises that are not contrived. You want to have things like here's a simple one. When I saw Star Wars the first time, I was 27 years old, and I would suspend my disbelief entirely. I mean, I can't do that now because I've been writing too long. But I could suspend my disbelief. I could watch a movie and just buy everything they're selling me. And Star Wars, like, wow! I just you're just soaking it in. I saw it opening day, first time, and when Han Solo says goodbye, I thought he meant it. I'm just now me of today, I would have seen it coming a mile away. It's like, yeah, he's going to show up again. But it really came as a surprise. And I wasn't the only one. It came as a surprise to the entire audience. I mean, the cheers. This is opening day. We don't know who the hell these characters are. By the end of this movie, the audience was so in love with them. They're cheering when the Millennium Falcon shows up again. And so that's the kind of surprise, you got to work on that kind of surprise. And And the thing about how do you do a surprise, you got to set it up. You got to set the surprise up. You can't just have it come out of freaking nowhere. I mean, you can't have, um, a story, um, and then just suddenly have dinosaurs show up. That's that. Yeah, that's a surprise. It's not a good one because you didn't set it up. The best surprises are the ones you set up because then there's resonance. When you have a surprise in a story, it it throws you back across the entire rest of the story. If you've ever seen the movie The Conversation, there's a scene in that that comes as a surprise, very, very subtle, comes as a surprise. And when you realize what you've just heard, and the Gene Hackman character realizes what he's just heard, it makes you remember everything in the movie up to that point. You have like this rush in your head of content where you're suddenly reviewing everything you've seen before because you find out that everything you saw before was you didn't understand what you saw. Now you do understand. The same thing, Chinatown, where it's revealed, where Faye Dunaway's secret is revealed. It throws you back across the entire movie. You're like, oh my God, that's why this happened, and this happened, and this. And that was all set up, and I didn't realize it. And that's the other key. If you're going to have a surprise and you're going to set up your surprise, make sure it doesn't look like a setup. I mean, like, remember painful setups in movies? in Jurassic Park Lost World, where we find out that Jeff Goldblum's daughter is a gymnast. I mean, that was such an obvious setup. You knew stupidly that gymnastics were going to figure on later on in the story. I mean, that's the worst example I can think of a setup and surprise. Because, first of all, the setup was horrible. You knew it was a setup. It smelled like a setup. It looked like a setup. It felt like a setup. And then when the payoff comes, you're like eye rolling. The audience groaned. I mean, they were like, oh. It's like, come on, you're insulting our intelligence here. And first, and the gym, you went to all that effort to set up something that's stupid. So you see what I mean? You should never realize when things are being set up. They should seem natural and organic, and not draw attention to themselves. Just seem like, okay, so this is happening, or this little bit of dialogue is, yeah, it's funny and it's entertaining, it's engaging, but it probably won't play into the story later on. And then you find out in Act 3 it was really, really important. That bit of information that was imparted to you, or changing character relationship or whatever was really, really important. It was a setup for something later on, and that's the challenge of writing. That's where you have to sharpen your skills. So surprises are cool, but they're not always easy. In fact, I'm going to say they're never easy because you got to think of them ahead of time. A writer writes backwards and forwards. You're thinking of the end of the story and the beginning of the story and how to bring the two together in a way that seems entertaining, engaging, and makes sense and doesn't make your audience feel like they wasted their time, either reading or watching your stuff. Kieran Brunkard, what was your favorite childhood comic outside of Marvel and DC? Thunder Agents, without a doubt. It was a brand new line of superheroes. Never heard of the company. It was a paperback company. Decided to get into comics. It was a bit of a comics boom when the Batman TV show came out, and so they brought out these 25-cent, 52-page comics, brand new superheroes, and they were drawn by guys I knew, from Marvel and DC, Wally Wood and Steve Ditko, my man Steve Ditko, ends up at drawing Thunder Agents, Gil Kane, guys like that. And so I was, all over these books. And the thing is that back in the day, and I've discussed this before, you didn't know what comics were coming out. When you went down to the drugstore, you'd find characters you never heard of, companies you never heard of, and Thunder Agents. I saw this book. I'm like, whoa, what's that? I never heard of these guys. And I bought, the first issue, and I remember picking it up and turning the first page just because I wanted to see what the insides looked like because the cover was so awesome. Are the insides as awesome as the cover? I open it up, and I didn't know who Wally Wood was. I didn't know his name, but I knew him from Mad Magazine. I knew him from other things. And there on the first page to me, it was Wally Wood. It's that guy. It's that guy that draws really cool bullet holes because I think the very first panel of the very first story, you see bullet holes in glass in the foreground, and which he would do with white mat. Later got to learn how he did that. So, um, so, so I saw it's that guy. It's that guy. I love this guy. And so I bought the book, and I bought every Thunder Agents I could find up, after that. And comics weren't always easy to find, but Thunder Agents, and the spin-offs Dynamo and No Man and all the other books they published were big with me. And also, they became a favorite because they became more of a favorite because this is the first superhero death I ever saw. The character, I don't want to spoil this for you, but the character Mentor dies in a later issue, and the Thunder Agents get revenge. They kill all the guys who killed Mentor. And I'm like, these are my kind of superheroes. They didn't let them go with a warning. They didn't wait for the police to show up and take them away. They just annihilated them using their superpowers. I thought, well, how cool is that? Now, my other favorite childhood comics were Creepy and Eerie, which I probably, at the time I was reading the early issues, I was probably too young to be reading these. They weren't meant for little kids. But they, once again, these were all these artists that I was familiar with. The gorgeous, the Rosetta covers. I mean, come on, what kid wouldn't want to read these? And I remember my mother wanted to give away my Little Golden books to the children's hospital. I was like, not my Little Golden books. And she says, well, you don't read them anymore, and you're outgrowing them and everything else. And I said, well, you can trade them to the children's hospital if you let me buy Creepy, which was the only one out at the time. And she's like, oh, okay. Because, I mean, at my house, they didn't like me reading Mad Magazine. That was a little too risque. But my mother gave in, and she let me buy Creepy from that day on. So there you go. Those are my two favorites. New question, Greg Augustin. Your take on G.I. Joe at IDW back in the early 2010s is my all-time fave, second only to Larry Hama's. Well, thank you. That is high praise indeed. In fact, your series pulled me back to the brand and back to comics after a decade hiatus. Well, I don't know whether to apologize or thank you for that one. One character I found truly entertaining was the resourceful Bill Docker. I know in your past Q&As you mentioned to focus on logistics and writing the world of Batman to understand how things work there. So the intro of this new character in your Joe Dixon verse made total sense. Was there a particular person you modeled him after? Like legends have it that Hama had done for his cast of Joe characters in A Real American Hero. Did you also have a reference dossier written up for his characters such that there was enough content for Bill Docker to have his own G.I. Joe file card? Yeah, I didn't write file cards. I didn't write anything about Bill Docker. I don't know that I ever gave him a first name. And he didn't have a G.I. Joe name. He just went by Bill Docker. And because I like the name Bill Docker, and I will explain where the name came from in just a moment. But yeah, I wanted to create a character who was a scrounger because I remember, watching, movies about World War II and military comedies and stuff. And they're always the scrounger character. And my dad and his pals and friends and stuff who had served in World War II, they would talk about, my dad was a bit of a scrounger when he was in the Army Air Corps. Different dads would talk about stuff, the guy in their unit who could get anything. If you asked him for something, he could find it. And anybody who's been in the military knows you don't always have all the supplies you need. It's not always about, can you scrounge us up some chocolate bars? It's, can you scrounge us up some parts for our tank or parts, things we actually need to continue fighting, because in military logistics, spare parts are a big thing. If you don't, things wear out in war. tanks, military vehicles go through an astonishing amount of maintenance and upkeep because of the rough treatment and damage they get. Weapons as well. If you don't know about guns, you may not know that you know, barrels wear out on rifles and machine guns and need to be replaced, particularly heavy machine guns. The barrels need to be replaced quite frequently, and just things wear out. And and then the issues of ammo and water and food and all these other things. And this is where the scrounger comes in, because the scrounger is going to be able to go out and he's either going to be able to deal or steal, whatever it is that you need to keep your unit fighting. And that was the purpose that Bill Docker served. And Bill Docker was, this amazing guy. I mean, there's stories in real life about, scroungers. One that I remember was when they wanted to blow up Saddam Hussein's bunker in Iraq. I know I'm on a tangent, but it's my show. They wanted to blow up Saddam Hussein's bunker in Iraq, his main one. And we simply didn't have the ordnance. We didn't have anything that could blow it up. And some guy at the Pentagon, who was a bit of a Bill Docker, said, there's an armory in upstate New York where they have barrels of cannons left over from World War II, like the big, big cannons. And he goes, these are, cast steel, cannon barrels. And he goes, couldn't we use them, basically cut them off the cannons, because we're not using them anymore. They're World War II issue. And then stuff the barrels with explosives. And if we drop that sucker out of a plane, it's going to be so heavy, it's going to bust through anything. It's going to get to the heart of a bunker. Doesn't matter how much concrete. This damn thing is going to weigh so much, it's going to get to the root of the problem. And they did it. They went up and they basically used these cannon barrels as, these tempered steel cannon barrels from World War II as the shell for the bunker buster bombs that blew up Saddam Hussein's main bunker. And it did the job, created a big old crater. So that's where, the real life Bill Dockers. And that's why I wanted to create a character like this, because he was pretty much absent. I don't know how Larry was a bit of a scrounger when he was in the Army. So I won't tell that story. But I don't know, unless there's a Joe that was a scrounger that I missed, but nobody's ever, you're not the first Joe fan to thank me for creating Bill Docker. So I got to imagine he filled a need. He filled a niche in the Joe universe that had up till now been unfilled. Now, who did I base him on? Obviously, Sergeant Bilko. If you don't know Bilko, find Bilko. Phil Silvers played Sergeant Bilko for 5 seasons on CBS in the 50s. I loved this show as a kid. I still love it as an adult. The ultimate scrounger, the ultimate Army con man. Just a louse of a guy, but the shows are funny as hell. Just crazy stuff happens in the peacetime Army. And so a lot of it is Bill Docker. And then part of it is Milo Minderbinder. Milo Minderbinder was a character in the novel, Joseph Heller novel, Catch-22. And he was the Army Air Corps scrounger in Sicily. And he could get you anything. And he was always wheeling and dealing. Bill Docker is more like Milo Minderbinder, and he makes these grand deals. In the book, there's a big thing about he makes a deal for an entire dock full of Egyptian cotton, and then doesn't know what to do with it. And there's a big thing about him getting eggs for a senior officer. And Milo Minderbinder was a big influence on Bill Docker. Now, who was the character himself modeled after Drew Carey? And it was apt to use Drew Carey because Drew Carey was, believe it or not, a United States Marine. He served from 1980 to 1986 as a field radio operator. And man, if you become a United States Marine, that you're riding high with me. I got a lot of respect for Marines. I always have. And so, when I found this out, I thought, well, Bill Docker's kind of a comedic character, and he's a bit of a nebbishy character. I didn't want him to be all heroic looking and everything else, because that's not his talent. His talent isn't going to war. His talent is helping the Joes go to war. His talent is support. And I thought, well, I'm going to base him on Drew Carey. It's a great look. And it also informs the reader that this is kind of a comedic character. This guy's kind of funny. But the fact that he was actually had been a Marine um, kind of, you know, sealed the deal for me. It's like, yeah, it's got to be Drew Carey playing Bill Docker. And I could imagine his voice. And I could imagine him playing this character in a live action production. So now, where did the name Bill Docker come from? There's a movie called Christmas in July. It's a Preston Sturges movie made in the 40s. If you ever get a chance to see it, it's a terrific movie. It's a really, really funny comedy. And William Demarest uh, played a character called Bill Docker. And he's the executive at a coffee company that's holding a contest. And that's the whole gimmick of the movie is there's this coffee company holding a contest, and Dick Powell somehow unwittingly cheats and wins the contest, and that's the whole premise of the movie. But it's very, very funny. And when I saw the movie, I just fell in love with the name Bill Docker. Like, I'm going to use that name somewhere someday, and hence we get Bill Docker as a GI Joe. So there you go. Hey, if you have any questions, suggestions, anything, bring it along to brunobookstore@gmail.com. Bring it to me, brunobookstore@gmail.com. It's the most reliable way to ask me questions. I see a lot of you on Facebook, on X, on YouTube saying, where do I go to ask these questions? Well, obviously you didn't watch the whole video because I know I end every video with this plea to please send your questions, suggestions to brunobookstore@gmail.com. It helps me format them. It helps me find them and helps me remember them. And yes, once again, if I didn't get to your question and it's been a while and you think, hey, that was a really good question, please feel free to ask it again. So that's it for me. Hey, what happened to me here? Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking and subscribing. And I hope to see all of you down the road.